So just as we were kind of getting ready to come on the air, Jaden Rashada, we find out that he is suing Billy Napier, which I'm totally in favor of. I don't know if he has legal standing to do this or not, but I'd say give it a shot. Napier's losing on the field left and right. Maybe he's going to lose in court here, there as well. I know you wrote about this for DawgNation.com, which means you probably dove into this a little bit more thoughtfully and deeply than I have. What do you make of, and we all remember the story, the huge NIL promise that was made to Rashada, the fact that it wasn't real, and obviously Rashada had to be turned loose, and that's how he ended up at Arizona State. I mean, I actually sort of feel for him that he was, given such a crazy offer from a collective that I don't even believe exists anymore around the Florida program. So I actually feel for Rashada even prior to him coming, to Georgia, kind of felt that way about this. How about the nature of this lawsuit in general, though? What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing here is maybe just the timing of it. And more than a few people have pointed out how Rashada is at Arizona State for over a year, almost actually over a year. And then after a month at Georgia, he does end up at this point where he is filing a lawsuit. DawgNation has obtained the complaint filed. Rusty Hardin, a prominent attorney in the Houston area, is the one who filed this complaint in Pensacola, Florida. It is just a very, it speaks to, unfortunately, where we are in the world right now in terms of college football, where I think in most walks of life, if you're promised $13.85 million as Rashada was by the University of Florida, and the lawsuit spells out here that Napier knew he was never getting that money, and they still tried to string Rashada along as far as they could. The lawsuit alleges that Rashada was promised a payment of $500,000 based upon the agreement that was signed in November of 2022. The day after that payment was due, they had actually sent Rashada a termination letter of said agreement. And throughout all that, Rashada still remained committed to Florida, thinking that they were eventually going to get something done. And as late as signing day, December 21st, 2022, this lawsuit alleges that Napier told Rashada that the Florida alumni, a.k.a. Hugh Hathcock, who is one of the defendants named in the suit, was going to get Rashada $1 million to sign with Florida. He ultimately signs with Florida. You're going to be shocked he did not get that $1 million there. And then shortly after that ends up transferring to Arizona State. This is just speaks to, again, where we are in college football, how weird all of this
Yeah.
is. Just, I guess, adds another very interesting layer to the rivalry that is Georgia-Florida. I believe John Talty was the one who reported that Rashada made Kirby Smart aware of this lawsuit, and that Kirby Smart rather gave Rashada the blessing to go ahead and file this lawsuit. Kirby Smart loves to maybe twist the knife, and while he has no perhaps ill will towards Billy Napier, if he has a chance to embarrass Florida, I don't think that's going to prevent him from doing so. And this certainly does do that in terms of just a black eye, I think, for the Florida program, in terms of bringing to light, I think, what a lot of people knew and how shady that sort of NIL deal was, and the complaint spells this out. He had agreed to a $9.5 million deal with Miami, and ultimately Florida comes in, trumps that to try and get him to come to Florida. And so he gave that up. And so I think it just, again, all sort of speaks to where this is and how this is a very unfortunately modern story in college football. To our knowledge, and the lawsuit alleges this is the first sort of example of this. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if this is not the last, just given where NIL is at this point in time.
Yeah, let me say two things about this. First of all, I'm sort of nostalgic for kind of like the bygone era of the SEC, in which like Philip Fulmer couldn't go to SEC media days because he was going to get summoned. And like the SEC has a long history of like stuff spilling into courts. And so if this is just sort of the latest kind of like modern version of what this league has sort of dealt with all throughout my life, then I'm here for it. I got no problem with, taking it to court. I mean, that just sort of feels like the SEC I've sort of known and grown up with. So, if this is the latest chapter in a Georgia-Florida rivalry that's been, I'd say, simmering pretty good here for a few years, then I'm all in favor of it. And for a lot of Georgia fans who didn't really feel like they knew Rashada too well before he came here, well, if he hates Billy Napier this bad, then he fits in pretty well with the rest of us.
Yeah, and again, in sort of seeing the complaint spelled out, I can understand why someone is suing someone for over $13 million potentially lost there. And I think the big thing, and it does spell this out in the lawsuit as well, I think Jaden Rashada only ever wanted to play college football and play it at a high level. But when schools come in and can't help themselves and start throwing around this kind of money, I completely understand why someone would feel compelled to listen to that. Certainly as an 18, 19-year-old, the idea of just signing and getting, $13.85 million promised to you over the next 4 years, that sounds very enticing. And when immediately the parties involved, as this lawsuit alleges, make it clear that they're not going to follow through on these payments, you do unfortunately have to look elsewhere. Rashada, as has been said, it was one of the top quarterback prospects in the 2023 recruiting cycle. But to this point, he is known far more not for his football abilities and what he has done on the field, but unfortunately, what this NIL deal and this agreement that he had originally made with Florida and signed, might I add, has done to him and his name, image, and likeness, ironically. So it'll be interesting seeing how Kirby Smart speaks about this, how Billy Napier speaks about this. I believe both are potentially set to talk next week at SEC spring meetings down in Destin, Florida. Maybe Billy Napier doesn't go that to avoid being served.
Oh gosh, if he got served in Destin, that'd be the highlight of to see Billy Napier get served in Destin. Somebody comes up, Coach, can I have your autograph? You've been served. That would be the highlight of my summer. At that point in time, I would just claim victory and move on. That'd be the absolute highlight of my summer.
All that I ask is that someone is there getting it on camera. It would just be so.
I do love that. All right, let me be serious about this for a second because I'm going to pretend to know more than I actually do. But it's kind of funny that we sort of think anything goes in NIL. But, I mean, these are contracts and there is contract law. And, I mean, I know enough to know that if Rashada had a contract with Miami that he would have the chance to get, and Florida induced him to break that agreement and then didn't live up to what they promised him, and then the opportunity he had at Florida, or should say at Miami, was somehow taken away from him. You can't do that in real life. You couldn't do that with a real estate deal. That's not good. It's against the law to induce somebody to break a contract unless you have, some sort of, I guess, compensation, a proper compensation for doing it. So, like I said, I'm pretending to know more than I do, but I mean, I've seen plenty of movies where tortious interference is a huge storyline. So this is kind of well understood within the culture. You can't just go around trying to convince people to break contracts. That's not allowed.
Yeah, I've watched Social Network enough to have a basic understanding of contract law and fraud at a high level. And in a more serious note, that is what this complaint alleges, that they attempted to defraud Rashada, certainly out of the $9.5 million that Miami had promised him, along with the $13.85 that they had agreed to, and on multiple instances, including, and this is perhaps what might ultimately be the most damning for Billy Napier, him personally vouching that Florida was going to pay him $1 million. It's important to note that the Florida was already being investigated by the NCAA for this NIL recruitment, but because of the lawsuits in Virginia and Tennessee that pertain to NIL, the NCAA has had to back off in terms of the enforcement arm of that there. So in terms of NCAA punishments and penalties that come from this, I wouldn't necessarily hold your breath. But again, this is just a very bad look for Florida in general. And, the fact that you have a rival quarterback, a guy that was once deemed to be at a point in time your quarterback of the future, to have this happen to you, it certainly serves as, I think, a warning to all recruits out there to be as careful as you can be with NIL and your own recruitment there. And in some ways, I do sort of feel for Rashada because I don't think he actively wants to be doing this. I don't believe there's a college sophomore out there that wants to be suing their former head coach. But when you have this kind of money at stake and you're promised something multiple times, I think, you can certainly understand why this is where we ended up where we did.